Hello everyone, my name is Michael Adley. Welcome to the rebuild instructions for fire and gas technicians performing maintenance on Halon 1301 cylinders. This rebuild instruction guideline is specifically for Kidde obsolete or Kidde 360 psi valve cylinders. Okay, before getting started, as with any maintenance procedure or guideline, you want to make sure you have all your parts and equipment and materials laid out and inspected and available to start performing the maintenance. Some items specifically that we'll need for this are the valve rebuild kit, of course, some different screwdrivers and wrenches, including a torque wrench, and different lubricants, specifically O-ring lubricant, Visilox O-ring lubricant, and STL2 thread lubricant. Okay, getting started, it's always best to secure the halon head and the dip tube into a chain vise. It's best practice to orient the valve to where the gauge is facing up and the safety burst disc nut is facing up as well. This allows you to remove them without much difficulty. Okay, it really doesn't matter what order that the gauge and safety disc nut are removed in. Some people do it differently, but found the best way to do it is to remove the cover first, obviously, and then take off the safety disc nut. That gives you freer travel when removing the gauge. You can bring the wrench all the way around and not run into the nut. So remove these three items: the gauge cover, the safety disc nut, and the gauge. Okay, the pilot check assembly. The pilot check assembly is what makes the cylinder operate. This little tiny valve right here within the larger cylinder head valve. Use a slotted screwdriver to remove the pilot check. Set the assembly aside for cleaning and rebuilding later. Okay, the next step after removing the gauge cover, gauge, safety burst disc nut, and the pilot check assembly is to loosen the valve head from the dip tube. Sometimes these can be very difficult to remove if they were installed too tightly. So we have a couple different tools to use. We've fabricated a head removal tool that screws into the discharge port of the valve, or sometimes simply using a strap wrench to loosen it will be sufficient enough. After loosening the cylinder valve head from the dip tube, stop using the strap wrench or valve removal tool and unscrew it the rest by hand. You don't want to end up dropping the head onto the floor or onto your foot. Okay, so we've removed the valve head from the dip tube, and we're going to work on removing the piston spring, and the valve seat O-ring from the cylinder head. We accomplish this by using a dull punch that we insert down through the pilot check orifice here, and a hammer, gently tapping until the piston pops out. Now there's some slight tension under the spring and the piston, so use caution. Okay, you can see here as you pop the piston out and it releases, you have the piston spring, the piston itself, and the valve seat O-ring. We're going to go ahead and throw away the valve seat O-ring. This is one of the parts that gets replaced. Pretty much any soft part gets replaced in this cleaning process. Of course, we're going to want to hang on to the piston and the piston spring. Okay, the next step is after we get the piston out, you can see that we have access to the cylinder where the piston travels inside the head, and there's going to be a piston O-ring inside there. Using the valve or the pick O-ring removal tool, we can go ahead and get in there and remove this O-ring. We want to be real careful though using this pick. It is sharp, and you can scratch the surface of the valve head because this valve is made of aluminum, so it will scratch rather easily. So we want to be careful when removing this O-ring. Okay, the next O-ring to remove is the neck O-ring. This O-ring is the O-ring that actually seals the surface from the cylinder from leaking outside of the collar. This seats about half an inch down inside the neck of the cylinder. So we're going to want to go ahead and remove and discard this O-ring as well. Once again, taking care not to scratch the surface of the valve. If it already hasn't come out, we're going to go ahead and use our O-ring pick removal tool and remove the safety burst disc and the safety burst disc washer, which is behind the safety burst disc here. We're going to go ahead and throw away both of these items as they are part of our rebuild kit. Okay, the next step is probably one of the most important, if not the most important part of performing maintenance on these heads. We're going to go ahead and clean these heads pretty thoroughly using WD-40 or Aerocroil and rags and the 3M Scotch-Brite scouring pads right here. It's really important to clean the cylinder head as thoroughly as you can. It doesn't have to be, spick and span, but it does have to be clean enough to where it'll help prevent any leakage in the future. Okay, after the head is clean, we're ready to start the reassembly process. So what I like to do is pull out my rebuild kit, go ahead and open it up and inspect each soft part that comes with it and make sure that everything is in good repair. You have your valve seat here, your piston O-ring, your neck O-ring, and your parts from your pilot check assembly that we'll get into later. The pilot check assembly, the poppet, the spring, and O-ring. Here is the safety burst disc and burst disc nut as well. So before inserting the O-rings, we're going to want to lubricate with the Visilux O-ring lubricant. You just want to lightly lubricate the O-rings. You don't want to heavily lubricate them. Just basically enough to get the O-rings into place without tearing them. So after you have the piston O-ring reinserted, you're ready to reinstall the piston and spring. But before we do that, we have to check the equalization port. As we mentioned earlier about the equalization port, it's very important to ensure that there's a clear path of travel for the halon and nitrogen to travel. So what we do is we spray some WD-40 inside the piston, which is hollow of course, and use some shop air and blow through the equalization port. It's a really tiny hole, but you will see some, you can see some misting of the WD-40 there. And that gives you a good indication that you do have an open hole there and the equalization port isn't clogged or damaged. Okay, reinserting the piston, you put the spring in first, the piston on top of the spring, and then using the handle side of a hammer, like a rubber handled hammer, you can push down to overcome that tension from the spring, and that piston will kind of lock in place there and sit at the bottom of the valve seat. Okay, now that we have our piston back in the cylinder head, we're going to install the valve seat, and we're going to put that valve seat in dull side down, dull side towards the piston, and usually that's the side that you'll see will have a very slight beveled edge on it, so that will sit up against the piston. We do not want to lubricate this O-ring, this valve seat. We just want to go ahead and insert it dry. We're going to go ahead and lightly lubricate the neck O-ring, however, similar to the piston O-ring, and install that as well. Okay, now we need to prepare the dip tube for reinsertion into the cylinder head. We're just going to go ahead and clean the threads with some WD-40, a wire brush, and a rag. And then we're going to go ahead and put on some thread lubricant, specifically STL2 thread lubricant. It's for use with dissimilar metals. Usually 3 strips about equidistant apart from each other is sufficient. Okay, now that we have the dip tube threads cleaned and lubricated, we're ready to reinstall the cylinder head. Use caution. Sometimes it can be a little tricky and you don't want to drop it. Okay, now that you have the cylinder head hand tight onto the dip tube. We're going to want to torque the cylinder head on. So what we do is we install an adapter here onto the pilot check port uh, threads. It's an 1.5 inch nut basically, and we're going to use an 1.5 inch socket with our torque wrench, and we're going to want to set that torque wrench to 30 to 40 foot-pounds, and that will give us a good seat on that dip tube onto the valve seat, which is right up against the piston. Now we're ready to install the pressure gauge. I like to use new pressure gauges out of the rebuild kit. Sometimes you can look at the pressure gauge, and if it is on 0, we can go ahead and reuse it, but it's always can't really go wrong using the new pressure gauge. We want to use some Teflon tape. Use a 1/8 inch Teflon tape on the threads, and screw in the pressure gauge using the 7/16 inch combination wrench until it's fairly tight, and of course we want to orient it to where the 360-degree PSI mark is facing upwards. After the gauge is installed, we can go ahead and reinstall the gauge cover using the flathead screwdriver. Okay, this next part is a fairly important step in the rebuild process. We want to go ahead and get our safety burst disc lubricated with some Visilox. This helps prevent tearing of the burst disc when we reinsert it back into the valve. So we're going to go ahead and lubricate that burst disc with Visilox and the washer, which is behind this burst disc here, and the safety disc nut. Reinstalling the safety burst disc, as mentioned earlier, the washer goes in first, and the safety burst disc goes on top of the washer, and then the lubricated surface of the disc nut goes on top. This helps slide on the burst disc and helps prevent tearing. Okay, using our 11/16 inch socket, we want to torque that safety disc nut to 25 foot-pounds on the torque wrench. We do not want to over tighten because we could tear that safety disc, and then we just have to replace it. Okay, now towards our final step in rebuilding the head, we can go ahead and gather our pilot check assembly parts. These include the spring, filter, snap ring, poppet, O-ring, and pilot check assembly. Okay, once again, we're going to be lightly lubricating two O-ring surfaces, or two rubber surfaces. One, the pilot check O-ring, and the poppet. We're going to just lightly lubricate this rubber sealing surface here. Okay, the pilot check assembly is just going to go right back in how it came out. The poppet's going to go in first. With the spring, we can use some needle nose pliers to stretch that spring out slightly. That helps keep that poppet pressed up against the pilot check assembly. Going to install our filter and then our snap ring using our snap ring pliers. We can go ahead and push all these down together, and it will snap in place. As with all snap rings, we want to use the flat side down towards the rest and the rounded side facing out. And then lastly, we'll go ahead and install our lightly lubricated O-ring. Okay, now we're ready to install the rebuilt pilot check assembly. We can go ahead and put this back in just how we pulled it out using the slotted driver. You're just going to want to screw that in hand tight. When you meet resistance and it's flush all the way, it doesn't need to be any tighter. You can go ahead and stop there. Okay, so if you're just rebuilding the halon head and you're not planning on putting it back into a cylinder and filling it with halon, it can be wrapped in cellophane, similar to this one right here, and put back on the rack for future use. Thank you for watching my video.